so grateful for the opportunity to be together and to look into your word, to learn from it, Lord, that we can be better servants of yours. And we just pray now that you'll speak through Pastor Jeff and that you'll just enable us to go away rejoicing and thankful that we were here. And we praise you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Okay.
It's my phone.
All
It's
right.
6 o'clock.
So, what's the problem?
Alarm.
Oh, the telephone's ringing. Okay.
Can you give him?
Just one of those nights, all sorts of interruptions. Okay, so we're looking at Judges and Ruth tonight. Judges and Ruth tonight. And remember when we left off with Joshua,
He died.
they hadn't, you're correct, Joshua died at 110. And so did the high priest, Eleazar. And
Nobody.
you got to remember in Joshua at the end, they had not finished conquering all the land. They really didn't finish, but they divided up, but they didn't finish. So now Judges is going to start off, and it's going to begin basically with recounting what they didn't do. And it goes over, first it goes over Joshua dying and Eleazar, but then they also say, well, this tribe didn't conquer this yet, and this tribe didn't do this yet, and this tribe didn't do that yet, and this tribe didn't do that yet. And these people are still being a thorn in their side. And at the beginning of Joshua, it kind of gives us a whole synopsis of the entire book in the very beginning. So if you take a look right at Judges, and so if you take a look at Judges there, and you take a look at that whole chapter 1, as you go through that chapter 1, it gives you kind of a synopsis of the book of Judges, that there's going to be these people raised up by God. So these that didn't get conquered yet, they're going to make problems for them. And that the people are going to fall away. And so God's going to raise up judges, and these judges will help conquer them, and we'll kind of go through a continuous cycle. So it gives, in that first chapter, it says what wasn't done, but it also gives this nice big overview of everything that happens in the whole book, and kind of gives you the cycle of it. Now, the title for the book in the Hebrew is that Soptim, which means judge or deliverer. And for most people in the Jewish faith, the term really means more deliverer than judge. We look at the term judge and we think of person sitting on the court there with the robe, bang and gavel. But for them, what the term judge meant was actually deliverer. It's actually a very different Hebrew word that's used there than the term later when it talks about a judge hearing cases. And so you got to always keep that in mind, that this is more about deliverer. And in the Greek, what happened is when that term got changed into the Greek word that means judges, that would then translate into English as judges. And that's why we have that title for the book. You can blame it all on the Greeks. If we had just left it in the Hebrew and everything, we probably would have called it deliverers. Yeah. Because that's really what the term for the Hebrew was talking about, meaning, and which makes sense. People who are delivering. Now, the author of the book is pretty much unknown. The Jewish tradition, and it's just tradition, attributes it to Samuel. But there's no firm evidence for it. There's nothing in Scripture that says Samuel documented these pieces. It is literally just Jewish tradition. There is the thought, once again, that good old Ezra, after the exile, he's the one that kind of put these pieces together. Now, there is this repeated phrase, and that in Judges where it says, in those days Israel had no king. And you see it in 17:6, 18:1, 19:1, 21:25. That same phrase over and over again. Which means whoever is writing it and putting it together, there was a king. Or they knew of the times when Israel had a king.
That makes sense.
And so that's what makes scholars, Bible scholars, believe that it was assembled kind of long after the facts that occurred. And that these were stories, different things that were passed down. Now we do get a little boxed in terms of the date, because it does say when the Jebusites still controlled Jerusalem, David conquered the Jebusites. David took over Jerusalem. So that means it was before David, but sometime after Israel got a king, which would have placed it, obviously, around King Saul.
So it was before David, but after King Saul.
Yeah, during the reign of King Saul, most likely, based on those verses that box it in there. Now, does everyone know what the word canon means? I'm not talking about a military piece. Yeah.
It's kind of the book of the Bible. It's kind of the book of the Bible. What religious theologians believe as far as the canonicity of the Bible and the I would say construction, more or less.
Yeah, what writings were going to be placed in, what writings aren't. So those writings that are, that's what we call the canon. The Jewish canon for the Hebrew Bible, that came about not until about 200 BC. So they'd have all these different writings, but to assemble it all in one complete set of writings and saying this is our canon, it wasn't recognized that until way after they had returned from exile, and they decided, for posterity's sake, the Jews did, to say, okay, we're going to put this all together in one set. They had a thing called the law, and later on when we were going through the kings, a young king by the name of Josiah, he has some priests who stumble upon the law because it hadn't been around for a while. What they are talking about there is the first 5 books of the Bible. That's what they're talking about there when they're saying the law. So it wasn't until much later, way after even the events that we have in the Old Testament, that all of that was put together as one thing called a canon. And so this was placed and decided to be added to the canon because they saw it as a book that speaks to God's faithfulness and also that shows God keeping his promise no matter how stupid they got. And it serves as a transitional book from conquest of the land, having no kings, to then finally getting a king. Okay, so that's why that was actually the rationale that the rabbinic scholars who pulled together the Jewish canon for the Hebrew Bible, that was the rationale they give for the inclusion of this book. And they had nice, very specific reasons for the inclusion of a lot of different books that they give over time. So that's for that. So it also shows theologically our inability on our own power to stay faithful to God. And when we're reading any of these books, you really can't be just saying, oh, those stupid Israelites, why are they so unfaithful to God? What's the matter with them? Because it's really speaking to us and ourselves too, and our own inability to be in our own power. So I give you an outline there of the book. That outline comes from the Bible Knowledge Commentary. Now, the Bible Knowledge Commentary, I'll throw that out there to you. If you want a nice, solid commentary that's inexpensive, and it's just a 2-volume set, and it's done by Dallas Theological Seminary, which is a non-Methodist theological seminary, I'll tell you right off the bat. But Arlene, I'm sure you've heard of Dallas Theological Seminary, yes. But it's done by Dallas Theological. The Bible Knowledge Commentary is a very solid, good Bible commentary. Theologically, it's more aligned with Baptist theology and Assemblies of God theology than it is Wesleyan theology, but it's
close.
Well, but it's still a good scholarly Bible knowledge, and it's in everyday language that makes it very user friendly for everybody. You know, it's just in 2 nice solid volumes too. So I just wanted to point that part out. So the other part you need to realize, and that people don't think of with Judges, is remember what I told you last time. When we ended in Joshua, you got all the tribes going all over the place. And the way society was back then, it was very insular. It was built around whatever village or town or city that you had. And if it got walled in, it made it even better. And when they talked about a king, it typically was just whoever the bubba was controlling that little city. They weren't controlling vast territories. And what would go on is every now and then the locals, and it would be like kind of the readers being all one community. And I don't know who's the head supervisor now. Well, we'll use Don Kresge since we all know Don. And so Don's the king of readers. And every now and then Don kind of says, you know, we need some stuff. Let's go raid Stroudsburg and go get some stuff. And he'd get together his army and they go trouncing down to Stroudsburg and conduct a raid, kill a few people, take a few women, grab some stuff, and then come back to readers. And that's the way things were done. At the most, what they would do sometimes is, if it was harvest season, they'd go, so one group would go raid another and then just kind of camp out in their fields for a few months or so. And then once we picked this crop enough, they go racing back. But there's no physically holding of land. It's just people basically going around beating up on each other and then going home. And it's all by these towns and villages. So Israel is not united in any shape or form. They are not united. They are functioning on a very, on at the most, the tribal level. At the least, on sometimes, just by a town or a village. And they got to go out and try to rally people every now and then. And so in Judges here, we go through all these judges, but a lot of times what people don't realize is we're only talking one, or if at the most, maybe two tribes of Israel. We're not talking the whole nation Israel. It's not like David getting everyone together and go fight a war. It's just talking a small bit. And so as we cycle through these judges, there's the thought, literary wise, that what this is doing, these were examples pulled out to show, one, how people go down, because as we go through Judges, the people go through cycles, and some like to point out these cycles that occur in Judges of the people getting bad, falling away from God, not remembering anything. Then some group comes and beats up on them and hurts them for a while, and then they start crying. And then once they start crying for God and stuff, a judge is raised up and then conquers these people, and then it says the land has peace for a while, and then we go through another cycle. And yes, there is that same cycle there, but one of the things you got to notice on the cycle is how people get worse. And their sins are worse. And even the judges are worse. In the beginning, the judges at least have some feeling for God and some attribute for God and some sense of faith. By the end, you're hard pressed to find it in Samson there, except for the bare end. Pretty much for the whole point of Samson's life, he ain't nowhere near being what you would think a godly judge should be. And so even the judges get bad. And basically what it shows is, by the end, wow, society is so poor that it kind of sets the stage for Samuel and for what happens then in the book of Samuel, and for why they begin to say, we need a king to pull us all together. And they start thinking in that way, that that's going to successfully do that. Because this abstract thing called God that's supposed to be holding us all together, it ain't helping to hold us together because we just can't stay faithful to it. We don't have the ability to do that. Any questions or thoughts on that before we go on? Oh, and Deb Elmeyer's on now, I see. Okay. So all of you know, the ones online here is we got Mark Gerger, we got Chris and Linda, we got Galen Avon, and we got Ann Roberts, and we got Susan Fraunberger, and we got Deb Elmeyer. And for you guys online, we got Joan, we got Arlene, we got Steve, we got Beth and Joe, we got Anna, we got Jan, Audrey, Bill, and myself. So that's who's all everywhere. But any questions or comments about any of that? Okay. All right. So good. So some of the pieces I want to point out to you. Okay, in the area of Judges. So we start off and notice right off the bat there, it talks about in chapter 2, he tells them about, who else, what they did and how they came up into the land. And then what happens is it talks about this first judge in chapter 3, beginning in verse 7, about how the Israelites did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, forgetting the Lord their God and worshiping the Baals and the Asherahs. Now we'll hear a lot about the Baals. Sometimes it's plural, sometimes it's singular. And we'll hear about the Asherah and the Asherah poles. Does anyone know what that religion was all about? We'll also hear about Shemosh. Does anyone know what that religion, and Moloch? Does anyone know what that religion part was all about?
Idols.
Hmm?
They were all idols.
Well, yeah, they're all idols, but it's still, it's a religion you're going to continually hear about all the way through Kings and everything.
For fertility?
Fertility?
Ashroth were, yeah. So archaeologically, the Asherah poles that they pulled, they were big phallic symbols. How do you like to have that sticking in your yard, you know?
I'm going to be chasing.
Just conjures up quite the image, doesn't it?
I don't want to. I'm trying.
But that's what they were. That's what they were, and it was meant for fertility. Yeah, it was a big fertility type symbol. And then Baal and Baals, they typically referred to different gods or goddesses dealing with nature in some way, shape, or form. And Baal and Baals was the way of talking about them holistically instead of trying to deal with each individual one.
I keep thinking in my mind about the, and it's just dropped out of my head. It'll come back.
That's all right.
Yeah, it'll come back.
Okay. Now, Shomos, Chemosh, and Moloch, Molech, they were actually one and the same god, just different names depending on which group you were with, but it was referring to the same God. And the simplest way of putting it is what we would call Satan. It was actually shaped like a bull with the big old horns and everything. Very masculine type of body, the images that we have uncovered. And that was the god that they did child sacrifices to. Where when it talks about you threw your kids in the fire, that was the god that they'd have this big burning fire and they'd actually take kids and throw them into the fire and kill them. He was primarily considered a god of strength, of military might. But it is kind of the god that down through generationally, they believe we kind of got our idea of what Satan would look like. since he was a god with fire and death and destruction and military might and conquest, and because he had horns, the old depictions of him, the stone statues that are uncovered, we would say, gee, kind of look, because it was actually supposed to be shaped like a big, strong ox and bull, but when you got a man with an ox image type of thing, and a little ox tail and the horns, it all of a sudden then starts, over time, beginning to look like what we have as Satan. And so some anthropologists and everything think that that's where we started getting that image from, and it built over time. You're shaking your head no. What?
That's not what I had, the image of Satan. The Bible says that Satan, I saw Satan fall as lightning from heaven. And
Right.
to me, Satan represents an angel of light. Because he was one of the three angels.
Yeah, I'm not talking biblical.
No?
I'm saying where we, in
Okay,
popular
okay.
culture, we get this image of Satan
Okay.
with the horns
They're off the
and the
wall.
tail
anyways. Yeah,
and the hoofs
yeah.
type
They're
of
off the
thing.
wall anyways.
That's what I'm saying is where we get the popular, because that same image
Yeah.
gets picked up in Jewish culture, and then it gets passed to Christian culture. In Jewish culture, it becomes a representation of evil, because this was the really bad guy.
Mhm.
And this was the one where Israel, when they kind of was always the tipping point, when they would start worshiping this one, that became the real big tipping point. Because now they don't care about anything. They're throwing their kids in the fire. They're doing all sorts of things. So they don't care about anything. And so in Jewish culture, that became them an image personifying evil, which then Christian culture, later the early church, starts picking it up as an image of Satan. And thus we got, yeah. Anyway, I digress. I just bring that up because we're going to be encountering these religions over and over and over and over and over again, constantly. And that's one of the one of the reasons. So typically when they're talking about the Asherah poles, and that you can equate a lot of sexual immorality that's occurring with that. When they're talking about the Baals, you can equate the idea of worshiping nature and worshiping the things that God has made, like the sun, the moon, the fields, the rain. Yeah.
Fertility was what I was gonna ask about. Was that kind of like a big thing, fertility?
It was a big pole, yes.
Yeah. In terms of the culture, I mean.
for your harvest and everything like that, yes.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And it was.
Would that be like number one on the list or not?
It was not number one, but it was a way of celebrating the harvest. Celebrating the harvest, celebrating things that, rain when it came, all sorts of, and that's typically what it was associated with, this idea that I'm gonna have a good harvest, my animals are gonna multiply a lot, so I'll have lots of, and that's, but then the Baals get thrown in there where, okay, I'm gonna purposely worship the sun or the moon, or I'm gonna worship certain critters because I think they're gonna give me good luck. And it's more a sense of luck than anything
They
else.
probably saw somebody get good luck by having a critter run across them.
Well, certain animals were associated with good luck and certain animals were associated with bad luck. So it becomes more a thing of the mysticism of the period and superstition. And that's where the Baals come about. And they're typically these little clay, they're very small little, archaeologically you see them, they're these small little clay figurines. And this one figurine that's like a woman might mean the sun or something. This figurine might mean the moon. This figurine, when in Genesis, when Laban gets mad at Jacob because Jacob's wife Rachel took her father's gods and shoved. That's what they mean by taking the gods. Think of like the little, Hummel, display case. She took all the little figurines out of the display case and shoved them in her. That's why she can sit on them on their saddlebag, because they're just these little clay things. They're not great big things, and families would post them in some place in the house, and then that was honoring those gods and giving them a place of honor type of thing. It wasn't always a formal set of worship, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, it's interesting on Wall Street, how they have the big, in New York, they have that big bull. Like, that's what we worship. Merrill Lynch is bullish on America. This is where your money is. It's like our money god.
Yeah, well, the bull though stands for a good market. Somehow it developed into a symbolism of a good, strong market.
Yeah.
Where the bear was going into hibernation, a weak market. Yeah. Okay. Excuse me. I don't know why I got a tickle in my throat.
Excuse me.
Huh?
I don't know if everybody.
Hi, Susan. Yeah.
Hi. I'm having a problem with my well. It's leaking, and so I didn't expect the guy to come like now. I thought he'd be here like tomorrow. So
Oh, please take care of your
he's outside
leak.
and asking me questions, and I'm back and forth. So I'm gonna leave the Bible study. I did send a chat message, but I don't know if everybody can see.
No,
it.
because
So,
my phone unfortunately is in the thing. So no, I didn't see it. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Oh yeah, I
don't
see
want
the
to
chat message now.
everything, So I will definitely join you again next week.
Oh, not a problem. Remember, we record these, so the recording will
Yes,
be
that's
posted
right.
and you'll be able to see it there.
All right. Thank you so much.
Okay. All right. Good luck with your leak
Have a good
house
evening.
there.
Thank you.
Okay. So now, big ones that we always remember, judges that we always remember and kind of think of. Deborah being the first one, the woman judge. And notice what it calls Deborah in the beginning there. It calls her a prophetess. Verse 4 in chapter 4. At that time, Deborah, a prophetess.
This version says prophet.
Hmm?
This version that I'm having.
The NIV, yeah.
Says prophet.
Right. Which is what, same thing as a prophetess, it's just kind of making it gender neutral. But yeah, so she spoke for God. She was one that spoke God's message, which in the Hebrew, in the translation to prophet, that's what they're talking about. One who's speaking God's message. And so she ends up pulling together these tribes. And if you look at the thing that's happening there, she says she's trying to, Lord of God of Israel commands you, go take position at Mount Tabor, bring 10,000 from the tribe of Naphtali and the tribe of Zebulun. And those are the tribes we're talking about. And they're going after this one king and his army who has been playing havoc. And so Barak wants her to come along with him, with him. And she says, yeah, but if you do that, then it's not going to be attributed to you. And we have the whole thing, and hopefully when you just see this, you understand that we're not talking about, these are very small fights. And they're basically trying to stop this group from always raiding them and creating havoc. That's what they mean when they talk about this group oppressed them. That's the oppression. So it'd be like us being here, a group comes in, raids us, leaves, now we lick our wounds, we're trying to get back together, but then it comes back again and does it again. And it keeps on going on and on and on, and finally you're trying to cry uncle. and sometimes they pay him protection money. So that's what Deborah is fighting against. And that's what Deborah is doing. And she is, as a judge here, notice she's speaking for God. She's actually a very godly person in this. And ironically, and some have done this, if you kind of compare the traits of all the judges that are talked about here, she's the most godly. She's actually the most godly of the bunch, which the feminists love. And love to point out, but it really is true. The other ones don't have a strong faith, like Gideon later. He's just there, schlumping around trying to deal with his wheat, hiding in a big old wine press vat thing so no one sees him. He's a coward. And then when God speaks to him, it's kind of like, oh, okay, well, how do I know this is really you? Gee golly whiz, I don't have much of a relationship with you. How do I know it? And he always constantly has to have some signs. So it's very, that's one of the other things you should note is Deborah's the judge with the most faith in this whole thing. And that's one reason why she stands out. Now, for those of you who really like sight and sound, could you imagine them doing chapter 5, the Song of Deborah? I don't think you'd be humming the tune as you left the theater.
So, considering that back in those days, women were second class, all white.
You see, that is a misnomer. Women were not second class. What you had a different basically, if a family had some wealth or property or anything like that, the woman was in a totally different social status than a poor woman. And so it really depended on what level of society you were at. And Deborah is an example here. So she's married. Deborah's married. But her husband's kind of like the secondary figure. Deborah's the prophetess. She's the one that says, here's what God's telling us to do. Come, let's do this. Rallying, being the leader. And other than her husband being mentioned right in the beginning, that's it. And that, depending on where the woman was, depended on what her status would be.
Is that any different today?
Well,
Good question.
the difference was on the lowest end. On the lowest end, you were dog meat. So later on, when we get the one chopped up in 12 pieces, that kind of, because literally you become a non-person. But the thing that you always have to keep in mind is you're being in a class of a bunch of other non-people, even if you're male. It's just that if you're male, you were stronger than the woman, so the woman was a super duper non-person. because she couldn't even defend herself unless she had a male there to defend her. Or if you were a prostitute or in any kind of thing. So a lot of it depended on the social class that you were in. So women could own property. Remember with Moses, when we were way back in Exodus there, or excuse me, in Deuteronomy and in Numbers, Moses gives the daughters the inheritance because there's no male relative left, so she gives it to the daughters. And God even blesses that and says, yeah, that's the right thing to do. So women could own property. Women, what happens is a lot of times we overgeneralize. And in antiquity, we just kind of give this big one over the world generalization of everything, and it's not in that type of status. Now, in a marriage relationship, yes, it was the male was the head, supposed to be the head of the household, but at the same time, if the woman was the one kind of running things or controlling it, then a lot of times it went to the woman, and the
So
woman.
there's no
was
prodigal woman.
Hmm?
So there's a prodigal son but there's no woman that has that story, in other words.
Well, yeah, but that's a whole different ballpark.
Yeah, that's true.
Right. That's a whole different ballpark. So we have that. We have Gideon, which is another big story that we always focus on.
And that's no different either today.
Hmm?
That's no different either today.
What's not different?
Gideon, he
Yeah.
had to have a sign. There's a lot
Yep.
of people that have to have signs.
Oh yeah, they sure do. All the time. All the time, you're right. Do this, do that. Even if God's directly speaking, well, let's make sure. I'm not sure. and then, we go through that very interesting thing of God saying, well, if you pull all these these three tribes together, you got this great big army, well, then you're gonna think you guys did it. So I want to make sure you understand that I, the Lord, am the one taking care of this. And he goes through this thing of trimming them down just to 300 men. But then they have that marvelous battle where they surround the enemy encampment at night, and all 300 of them have a horn and a lantern. And you should take note that none of them have weapons. And they light the lamps and they blow the horns, and it gives the sense that they're surrounded. Because typically a horn was used for a group of at least 100 or 1,000. And so if you have all these horns, you're thinking, I got all these thousands of people around me, surrounding me, and I'm toast. And so it throws the whole army into panic, and they go running in every different direction like the Keystone Cops, and then they get chased, and we have that big chase scene as Gideon then sends messengers to the other tribes to have those tribes chasing them and cutting them off before they can cross the Jordan. So, Gideon's another big one, and then really we go next, and the other big one is Samson that people always focus on. And children's church uses Samson a lot. Everybody loves Samson, but he was a pretty horrible guy.
He didn't drink.
He carouses pretty
He
good.
carouses, but he doesn't
He-
drink.
He does. Yeah, he does.
He's not supposed to.
He's not supposed to, but he does. There's a lot of things he's not supposed to. But he does.
He's a Nazarene.
And Samson's really he's just a bad judge. There's no two ways about Samson. There's nothing too redeeming of the guy. God blesses him in all these ways, and he just squanders it constantly. And it's not until the very, very end where he takes down the temple. So that becomes the judges. Like I said, you just have to understand that it go from bad to worse to worse. And we leave off at the end of Judges after we go through this cycle. And in the table, you can see all the years of time that we're talking about. And Gideon's the last one that actually says they had a period of rest. So some of the thought is that these next judges come in pretty quick succession of each other. And there really is no rest.
There's a number of, Samson, 13, 14, 15, 16, a whole bunch in there.
Yeah, well, in the table, I got all the years laid out for you. Yep. And so then it ends, Judges ends, and we have this, basically it's a period of where they have very much so fallen away from their religion, from God. They're in the state of apostasy. And total moral degradation's going on. And now they degenerated even to civil war, where they fight against the tribe of Benjamin. And then once they settle the civil war, we got that really unbelievable action of now we gotta go find them wives because we don't want the tribe of Benjamin to get wiped out. You know, and it altogether it just shows how far down they have declined. And the main reason for that last part, dealing with the Civil War and the fighting against the tribe of Benjamin, is that dovetails in later with Samuel getting Saul. And remember what tribe Saul came from? Yep. Yep, the least. He's from the least family of the least clan of the least tribe, Benjamin. And Benjamin is really the least tribe and considered the least tribe because of this civil war that they ended up fighting against the tribe of Benjamin, and they knocked most of them off. And they don't have much left.
Isn't Benjamin like non-existent today?
Well, most of the tribes, it's pretty non-existent for trying to figure out who's from what tribe. There's some meager attempts to, in the Orthodox side, Hasidic Judaism, there's attempts to say, oh, I'm from this tribe and stuff like that, but you can't really tell because of the great dysphoria that occurs over the centuries. Who knows from what and which one's around? The only ones that I know of try to identify tribes anymore are the Hasidic Jews and the Mormons. Yeah. Because the Mormons claim to be the 13th tribe.
13. But they're
Where are
lost
they
anyways.
descended from?
What?
They're lost anyways.
That's right.
Right.
In more ways than one. And so then,
Well, they headed to Utah.
and so now, leaving all that bloody mess and that big pile of nothing called Judges there, it just goes from bad to worse to worser. We go to a nice book, Ruth.
Love story.
Yeah, love story. And Ruth in the Jewish canon, Ruth is placed in there with Psalms and Proverbs and Ecclesiastes and all because it's seen as a book of literature. Now, what gives it validity for us is this line of David. And remember, Boaz is the son of
Rahab.
Rahab, right. Boaz is the son of Rahab. So that kind of helps us place it, because Boaz is an older man here. He doesn't mention his mom. It's not like he brings Ruth home to his mother or anything like that. So it kind of places it early in the period of Judges. And it's viewed as this very, very nice short story, Hebrew short story. It was used and read in the Jewish faith. It was used and read during the Feast of the Tabernacles, the weeks, Feast of Weeks, Pentecost. So after Passover, then you have that long period, the Feast of Weeks, and that's when Ruth was often read. And her whole name, is talking about as refreshment, renewal, comfort, and that's what the book was meant to provide. Now, the book authorizes, once again, ascribed to Samuel. That's just by Jewish tradition, but we don't know. There's no documentation or anything that says it's definitely Samuel. That's just what Jewish tradition attributes it to. There's a lot of history in Ruth that helps connect it to reality. Kind of like a Tom Clancy novel is like so exciting because it has all this nice detail in it and people can relate to it, along with it being a good story. Believe it or not, in Ruth you have the same thing. So you have things like the King's Highway mentioned and traversing the King's Highway, and there actually was a thing called the King's Highway, because all these kings of these different villages, was the main route back and forth between places and to raid each other. And so it went from Moab all the way over into what's Judah. And it was known as the King's Highway, and that's a historical piece. And we know that Moab was the son of Lot, but it was kind of often, so it's kind of in a tangent related to the Israelites, because Lot was Abraham's nephew. But their major god, they worship Shamash. And so understand, the really bad god. The Moabites threw their kids in the fire. They did lots of bad things. And there appears in a time of Judges where there is a sense of stability with the Moabites and a relationship, and so it's thought that's when Ruth is occurring, because we don't have anything of fighting going on between the Israelites and the Moabites. And it's okay that Ruth as a Moabite is coming into this family. So that's why we think it occurs in there. And this whole thing about the sovereignty of God, the steadfastness of God, and the steadfastness of a person who basically is adopted into the faith. It is not her faith. And she accepts the faith, even though it will mean hardship for her. Remember, her sister that goes away after all the husbands die probably did, in terms of the secular understanding, probably did the smarter thing. Because sticking with a widow that has no husband, has no property, has nothing, well, all you're doing is guaranteeing poverty. And so Ruth is really, she has a sense of loyalty to her mother-in-law, but then she adopts this faith and she is steadfast to it. And that becomes a big, that's a real big part of it. And this whole, the term for love that's used that's in the Hebrew, when it's talking about Boaz and Ruth, that love, that word actually means a steadfast love. It's interestingly, it's not a romantic love or a sexual love or anything like that. It's a love of a steadfastness. So it's not a Hallmark movie where she sees Boaz and Boaz sees her and they automatically, eyes start twinkling and they fall in love with each other and they go through, things. It's more of a Boaz sees her and it's a thing of pity, of seeing the value of her.
Admiration.
In her, but just seeing her own moral ethicity. And so through that, he redeems her and makes her part of the family. And so when they talk about the love, they talk about the steadfastness. And this is, for the Jews and for us, this is one of the things we're supposed to see. And this is the type of love that God is calling us to have to him. A steadfastness that lasts through anything that goes on. Okay? It was debated whether to ever put it in the canon because there is no mention of God throughout the whole book. And so there actually was a debate as to whether to put it in. But that's what they saw it as, a story that was a metaphor for steadfastness. Okay, so any questions on that? We're at 7 o'clock now. Any questions, comments, thoughts? Nope. Okay, looking around here on the screen, I don't see anybody waving or anything. Okay, well, you all have a good evening. Next week, we do not have Bible study next week, okay, because of the Lenten community service at 7 o'clock, and that's a joint Lenten community service. Readers and Sherry Lane together. Now be here in the sanctuary, but we'll also be sending out the YouTube link for on YouTube, and we'll have the go-to meeting set up during the service too. Okay? But then when we come back the week after that, you should have looked over at least 1 Samuel. And we're going to have some Psalms and different things thrown in there too, but mainly it's 1 Samuel.
The rest of the Old Testament, I thought was what
Yeah. All right. Very good. See you later.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Yeah.
Nice job, boy.
Exactly. Exactly.
Must be. I shave.
Pardon me?
Doesn't matter.